Chapter 1. The Life He Built. David learned early that stability was something you constructed, not something you trusted to appear on its own. Most mornings began before sunrise. The house was quiet when he slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Alara, moving through familiar shadows as he dressed for another day in glass towers and conference rooms. Coffee brewed while emails loaded. Numbers, projections, risk assessments, these were languages he understood fluently. By the time his city woke up, David had already won half his day. His work paid well, very well, the kind of salary that erased worries before they had time to form. The mortgage was manageable. The savings account was healthy. Isla's private school tuition was paid a year in advance every year. Vacations were planned without checking balances. Repairs were handled without stress. He took a quiet pride in that. Never spoken aloud, never demanded gratitude for. Providing wasn't something you bragged about. It was something you did. At night, he came home later than he intended. He always did. Some evenings, Alara was already in the living room, scrolling through her phone with the television playing to no one. Other nights, she'd be in the kitchen, moving with efficiency but little warmth. They exchanged updates like coworkers, logistics, schedules, reminders. The conversations were smooth, polite, efficient. David told himself that was what adulthood looked like. Isla, though, still ran to him. "Dad," she'd shout when she heard the door, sneakers abandoned halfway down the hall. She hugged him with the same certainty she'd had since she was 3, since the first time he'd knelt down to her level and promised he wasn't going anywhere. David always knelt for her, always asked about school, always listened, even when his phone buzzed unanswered in his pocket. Later, when Isla was asleep, David would sit at the dining table with his laptop open, reviewing reports while the house settled around him. Sometimes Alara sat across from him. Sometimes she didn't. When she did, silence stretched comfortably, or so he believed. He thought peace meant the absence of conflict. He thought love could be measured in consistency. He remembered the years he turned down opportunities, promotions that required relocation, transfers overseas that promised balance and time, but demanded change. Japan had come up more than once. He closed those emails without regret. What was ambition compared to family? David didn't miss birthdays. He didn't forget anniversaries. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't drink too much. He didn't stray. He worked. He provided. He stayed. And somewhere along the way, he convinced himself that emotional distance was not neglect, it was sacrifice. That exhaustion was proof of love. That being reliable mattered more than being present. Standing in the doorway of Isla's room each night, watching her sleep, David felt certain of one thing. Everything he built, every hour he traded, every piece of himself he set aside, was worth it. This was the life he built. Chapter 2. Snow, silence, and a casual balm. Snow fell in slow, indifferent sheets outside the kitchen window, blurring the streetlights into soft halos. David noticed it absently as he set his briefcase down by the door, shaking the cold from his coat. The house smelled faintly of rosemary and something roasted too long. Dinner had already been made or reheated. "You're late," Alara said without looking up. "Meeting ran over," David replied, loosening his tie. "I texted. I saw." Her tone wasn't sharp. It wasn't warm either. Just factual. He moved into the kitchen, kissed her cheek out of habit. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in. He told himself that meant nothing. People had quiet nights. Marriages did that. Isla's chair was empty. "Homework?" he asked. "Finished." "She's upstairs," Alara said, sliding a plate toward him. "Eat before it gets cold." They sat across from each other, the clink of cutlery filling the spaces neither of them rushed to occupy. The television murmured from the living room, some holiday, commercial looping cheer they weren't watching. Outside, the snow kept falling. Alara took a sip of water, then said casually, "So, Cashin's taking Isla to Aspen for Christmas." David looked up. "Cashin?" She nodded, like she was confirming a delivery time. "Her dad. He rented a place. It'll be good for her." The word dad landed oddly, like it had been placed deliberately. "Aspen," David repeated. "When was this decided?" "Recently." She cut her food neatly. "We'll be there through New Year's." "We," he noted. Not she. Not Isla. We. He waited for more. An explanation. A glance. Something that acknowledged this was new information. Alara ate calmly, unfazed by his silence. You are going too? He asked. She finally looked up. Of course. She's still young. The snow outside seemed heavier now. David set his fork down. Alara, that's Christmas. I know what we usually do, she interrupted gently. This just makes more sense this year. More sense for who? She exhaled, a small sound of patience wearing thin. For Isla. David searched her face for hesitation and found none. Did you talk to me about this? I'm telling you now. The words weren't defensive. They were complete. And Cashin, David said slowly. He's staying there too? Yes. Something tightened behind his ribs. So you'll be together. She shrugged, minimal movement. It's about Isla spending time with her real father. There was again. Real. David opened his mouth, then closed it. The room felt strangely quiet, as if even the television had lowered its voice. And what am I supposed to be in this plan? Alara tilted her head, studying him, not unkindly, but distantly. You're busy. You always are. I'm not trying to start a fight, she said calmly. I'm just letting you know what's happening. He stared at her, waiting for the familiar edge, the softening, the reassurance that would follow hard conversations. It didn't come. Her tone didn't sound temporary. It didn't sound negotiable. It sounded decided. And David realized, sitting there with the snow pressing against the windows and silence pooling between them, that he wasn't stunned by anger or jealousy, but by how final her voice already was. Chapter 3, If you don't like it, divorce me. The words didn't come all at once. They arrived slowly, pulled from David like splinters. He stood by the kitchen counter long after dinner had gone cold, watching Alara rinse a plate that was already clean. The water ran too long. The sound filled the room, heavy and unnecessary. So, he said finally, keeping his voice even, what am I supposed to tell Isla? Alara turned the faucet off and dried her hands carefully, as if the order of things mattered. Tell her you'll see her when she gets back. When she gets back, David repeated, from spending Christmas with her biological father. She sighed, not frustrated, just tired. That's what he is. I know what he is, David said. I'm asking what I am. Alara looked at him, then really looked like she was deciding how honest to be. You're her stepfather, David. The word landed harder than he expected. I've raised her since she was 3, he said quietly. I taught her how to ride a bike. I'm the one she calls when she's scared. I'm the one who sits through school meetings. And I'm grateful for that, Alara replied. But that doesn't change biology. Is that what this is about? He asked. Biology. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. It's about Isla needing a real father figure in her life. The phrase echoed, sharp and clinical. Real. Father. Figure. David felt something in him shift, like a support beam cracking. You're saying I'm not that. I'm saying Cashin is her father. And I'm what? His voice wavered despite his effort. Convenient? Temporary? You're being dramatic, Alara said, though her tone remained controlled. This doesn't have to be a big deal. It already is, he said. You made it one when you decided this without me. Her eyes hardened slightly. I didn't think I needed permission. You didn't think I deserved a conversation, David corrected. Silence stretched. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, counting something down. David felt suddenly small in his own house, like he was standing in a place that no longer belonged to him. So, if I'm uncomfortable with this, he said slowly, if I don't agree to you spending Christmas with your ex-husband and my daughter, what then? Alara didn't hesitate. Then we have a problem. And problems get solved how? He asked. She straightened, meeting his gaze with an unsettling calm. If you don't like it, divorce me. The sentence was delivered without heat. No raised voice. No tremor. Just a statement, clean and complete. David stared at her, waiting for the follow-up. The laugh. The softening. The realization that she'd gone too far. Nothing came. In that moment, something devastating settled in. Not rage. Not heartbreak. Understanding. She wasn't threatening him. She was informing him. The marriage he thought he was protecting had already shifted without him. His role, the steady provider, the reliable presence, had an expiration date he hadn't seen coming. He had believed love was built on endurance, on showing up again and again. But standing there in the quiet kitchen, David realized something he never had before. He was replaceable, and Alara already knew it. Chapter 4. The Transfer He Never Took. David didn't sleep that night. He lay on his back staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet rhythm of Alara's breathing beside him. Each rise and fall a reminder of how close someone could be and still feel unreachable. When morning came, he moved through the routine automatically, shower, coffee, tie, his mind lagging behind his body. At the office, the glass walls and muted hum of productivity felt familiar, comforting in their indifference. Numbers behaved the way people didn't. They followed rules. They made sense. David sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and tried to focus on a quarterly forecast that suddenly felt irrelevant. Instead, his inbox caught his attention. Subject: International Transfer, Tokyo Office, Follow-up. The email was months old. Almost a year, actually. He hadn't deleted it. He never did. He simply archived it, like a door left unlocked but unopened. David clicked. The message was polite, professional, persistent. The Tokyo office wanted him. Senior role, fewer hours, strategic oversight instead of constant firefighting. A chance to build something without burning himself down. He remembered how his manager had said, "You've earned this." He remembered what he'd said in return. "I can't relocate. My family's here." He scrolled through the details again, the relocation package, the housing support, the cultural transition assistance. The company hadn't rushed him. They'd waited. They always had. David leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He thought of every late night he'd missed dinner, every vacation cut short by a call he had to take, every promise of next year will be better that never quite arrived. He thought of East Law School play he watched through shaky phone footage because he was in a boardroom 3 states away. All of it justified. All of it for them. At lunch, his colleague James stopped by. "You look like hell," he said lightly. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," David replied automatically. James glanced at the open email on his screen and raised an eyebrow. "Tokyo again?" David gave a small, humorless smile. "They don't give up. Neither should you," James said. "You always talk about balance. That job actually has it." David didn't answer. Later, alone again, he reread the part about quality of life. The words felt almost mocking now. He thought of Alara's calm voice. "If you don't like it, divorce me." How easily it had been said. How little space there had been for him in the decision. What had the marriage taken, quietly, over the years? His time, his energy, his sense of being needed. He had turned down a life-changing opportunity to be present for a family that now told him his presence didn't count. He had chosen stability and somehow still lost his place. David stared at the cursor blinking in the reply field. It felt like standing at the edge of something, terrifying and clarifying all at once. He hadn't changed, but everything around him had. And for the first time, the transfer he never took didn't feel like a sacrifice anymore. Chapter 5. The Signs He Ignored. Once the idea took hold, it refused to stay quiet. David noticed things now that had once slipped past him unnoticed, like dust and sunlight. Sitting alone in the living room one evening, he watched Alara from across the space as she stood near the window, her phone tilted slightly away from him. Her thumb moved quickly, then paused. A smile crossed her face, small, private, gone the moment she sensed his eyes on her. "Work?" he asked. She replied, not looking up. "Just something I forgot to answer earlier." She slid the phone into her pocket and turned back to him, expression neutral again. David nodded, accepting the explanation like he always had. He told himself he trusted her. He told himself couples didn't need to share everything. But now, memory after memory surfaced. There had been the late nights, Alara sitting up long after Isla had gone to bed, screen glowing softly against her face. When he'd asked who she was talking to, she'd said, "Just catching up with an old friend." The word old had made it feel harmless. Nostalgic, even. There were the stories that shifted subtly over time. How Cashin had once been described as irresponsible, then complicated, then misunderstood. How his name, once rarely spoken, began appearing more often in casual conversation. Isla asked about him today. Alara had said once, stirring a pot on the stove. He's been trying really hard lately. David remembered shrugging. That's good for her. He hadn't asked what trying meant. There were weekends Alara insisted on taking Isla out alone. Girls' time, she called it, smiling. David had welcomed the chance to catch up on work. He remembered feeling virtuous about it, presenting his absence as generosity. And there had been a change in how Alara touched him. Not cold, exactly. Just brief. A kiss on the cheek instead of the lips. A hand withdrawn a second too early. Intimacy became scheduled, efficient, something checked off rather than leaned into. Once, months earlier, he tried to talk about it. Do you feel distant lately? He'd asked, careful not to sound accusatory. Alara had laughed softly. You're imagining things. We're just busy. Busy. That word had covered everything. It always had. David walked through the house now, noticing the quiet evidence he'd ignored. A scarf on the chair she didn't usually wear. A sudden interest in music he didn't recognize. The way she guarded her phone like it contained something fragile. He stopped by the hallway mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Tired eyes, lines carved by years of responsibility. A man who thought love was something you prove by enduring. The truth settled slowly, heavily. The ultimatum hadn't been the beginning. It had been the end of a process already underway. Alara hadn't woken up one day and chosen distance. She'd been stepping away for months, maybe longer, while he stayed still, confident that consistency was enough to anchor someone who had already started drifting. David sat down, the weight of it pressing into his chest. The marriage hadn't cracked all at once. It had been eroding quietly while he wasn't looking. Chapter 6. Isla's quiet loyalty. Isla found him in the garage that Saturday morning, sitting on a folded chair with a toolbox open at his feet. David had been staring at a loose hinge on one of the cabinets without really seeing it, turning a screwdriver slowly in his hand. Dad, she said softly. He looked up immediately. Ma'am, what's up? She walked over, her socks sliding slightly on the concrete, and leaned against his leg the way she had since she was little. David closed the toolbox and set it aside. Whatever he'd been pretending to fix could wait. Mom says you work too much, Isla said, not accusing, just stating a fact the way children did. He smiled faintly. Your mom might be right. She frowned. But you still come to my stuff. I try to, he said. I don't like missing it. Isla nodded, satisfied. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I got a good grade on my math test. David unfolded it carefully, exaggerating his inspection. 89, he said. That's awesome. I almost got 90, she said, grinning. Almost only means you know how to get there next time. She beamed, pride lighting her face in a way that made something twist painfully in his chest. Later that afternoon, they sat on the living room floor working on a puzzle Isla had dragged out from the closet. She handed him pieces confidently, like she trusted he knew where they belonged. You're good at this, she said. I've had practice, David replied. With puzzles. With figuring things out, he said, then added, sometimes slowly. Isla laughed. You always help me when I don't get stuff. He swallowed. That's what dads do. She didn't hesitate. Yeah. The words settled between them, simple and unquestioned. That night, after Isla had gone upstairs, David lingered by the bottom of the stairs, listening to the quiet. He thought about school forms he'd signed, emergency contacts that listed him second, or not at all. Doctor visits where he'd sat beside Alara, present but invisible. He had always assumed love would fill in the gaps paperwork couldn't. He remembered the first time Isla had called him dad. She'd been half asleep, sick with a fever, reaching for him in the dark. He hadn't corrected her. Alara hadn't either. The word had stayed. Can you tuck me in? Isla asked later that evening, peeking down from the stairs. Of course, David said immediately. In her room, he pulled the blanket up around her shoulders. She grabbed his wrist before he could step back. You'll still be here in the morning, right? He hesitated for half a second, long enough to notice the question at all. Always, he said. She smiled, already drifting. David stood there longer than necessary, watching her breathe, knowing how fiercely he loved her and how little that love protected him. No legal document had his name where it mattered. No title guaranteed his place. And for the first time, he understood the quiet terror of loving a child who could be taken from him without his consent. Chapter 7. A decision made without drama. David made the decision on a Tuesday that looked exactly like every other Tuesday. The sky was overcast, the kind of dull gray that flattened the city into muted shapes. He arrived at the office early, nodded to the security guard, and rode the elevator alone. Nothing about the morning announced that something permanent was about to happen. He closed his office door and sat at his desk, staring at the email from Tokyo that he had reopened so many times it felt familiar. The cursor blinked patiently at the end of an empty reply. He didn't feel angry. He didn't feel desperate. He felt clear. David typed slowly, reading each sentence twice before moving on. He confirmed availability. He accepted the role. He thanked them for their patience. The words were professional, almost detached, but his hands were steady. When he finished, he didn't hit send right away. He leaned back and looked around the office, the framed certificates, the family photo on the shelf with Isla missing her 2 front teeth, Elara smiling beside him. He picked the frame up, turned it over, then set it face down. Then he clicked send. The reply came faster than he expected. "We're thrilled to have you. Welcome to Tokyo." David exhaled quietly, like he'd been holding his breath for years without realizing it. At lunch, he sat alone at a small cafe near the office. He ordered the same sandwich he always did and ate half of it distracted. Around him, people talked about deadlines, holiday plans, minor complaints. Life moved forward, unaware that his had just shifted direction. His phone buzzed. A message from Elara. "Don't forget we're going to my sister's on Friday." David stared at the screen, then typed back. "I know. It wasn't a lie." He didn't know. He just knew other things now, too. That evening, he came home at his usual time. He helped Isla with homework, nodded through Elara's recounting of her day, washed dishes without being asked. He laughed at the right moments. Nothing in his behavior changed. He didn't announce anything. He didn't test the decision by saying it out loud. After everyone was asleep, he sat at the dining table and opened a new document on his laptop. He made a list. Passport, medical records, bank accounts, work transition. Each item was handled calmly, checked off with care. There was no rush, no shaking hands. This wasn't an escape. It was an exit plan with intention. David paused once, fingers hovering over the keyboard. A flicker of doubt passed through him, not about the job, but about the silence. He wondered if he should say something, if decisions were supposed to be shared, if love demanded a warning. Then he remembered the kitchen, the ultimatum, the certainty in Elara's voice. Some decisions, he realized, didn't need drama to be final. He closed the laptop, turned off the light, and went upstairs. In the dark, lying beside someone who felt farther away than ever, David accepted the Tokyo transfer fully, without confrontation, without announcement, and without regret. Chapter 8. Untangling a Life. David approached the dismantling of his marriage the same way he approached everything else, with order. He started with the bank accounts. Early one morning, before the house woke up, he sat at the dining table with his laptop and a cup of coffee gone cold. He reviewed statements line by line, numbers steady and familiar. Joint savings, emergency fund, Isla's education account. He transferred what was fair, not what was vengeful. Left more than he needed, more than a lawyer would have advised. This wasn't about winning. At the bank later that day, the clerk smiled politely. "Large transfers today," she said. "Yes," David replied. "Reorganization." She nodded, stamped the papers, slid them back. The sound of the stamp felt louder than it should have. Next came the house. David stood in the living room after work, hands on his hips, taking it in as if he were a guest. The couch Elara picked. The rug Isla spilled juice on years ago. The dent in the wall from when they moved in the bookshelf together and laughed instead of fixing it. He called the attorney the next morning. "I want a clean divorce," David said once the formalities were done. No custody dispute. No asset battles. There was a pause on the other end. "Are you sure?" "You've been Isla's primary." "I'm sure," David said quietly. The paperwork arrived electronically. He read every page, signed where required. Initial margins. When it came to the house, his hand lingered over the signature line. He remembered mowing the lawn on Sundays, teaching Isla how to plant flowers she never watered, repainting the guest room because Ilera changed her mind. He signed anyway. That evening, Ilera noticed the envelope on the counter. "What's that?" she asked casually. "Documents," David said, rinsing a glass. "From where?" "Work stuff." She accepted the answer without question, already turning back to her phone. The indifference stung more than suspicion would have. David boxed up personal items slowly over the next few days. Not everything, just what mattered. Books with notes in the margins. A watch his father gave him. A frame drawing Islam made when she was 6, stick figures holding hands, labeled Mom, Dad, me. He placed it carefully between sweaters. At night, when the house was quiet, doubt crept in. He wondered if calmness was cowardice, if silence looked too much like surrender, if Ilera would ever understand the weight of what he was choosing not to fight for. Then he remembered her voice. The ease of the ultimatum. Dignity, he decided, didn't require witnesses. On the final form, the last document transferring ownership, David paused only long enough to breathe. He signed his name clearly, deliberately, and closed the folder. By the time he finished, there was nothing dramatic to show for it. No shouting, no slammed doors, just a life carefully untangled, thread by thread. And David, standing in the quiet afterward, choosing restraint over retaliation, even as everything he'd built slipped from his hands. Chapter 9, The Letters. David sat at the dining table with a single lamp casting a warm circle of light over the polished surface. Outside, the street was hushed, the snow from earlier in the week still lying in soft drifts. He spread 2 sheets of stationery before him, each blank and waiting, and took a deep breath. The first was for Ilera. He picked up his pen and began carefully, each word measured. "Ilera," he wrote, "by now, you know that I accepted the Tokyo transfer. I am leaving. This is not an impulsive decision, nor is it made in anger. It is a choice I make for myself, for the life I have neglected in the pursuit of a stability that no longer exists here." He paused, running a hand through his hair. How do you convey finality without cruelty? How do you close a chapter without blaming someone for the story? He continued, "I will arrange all matters regarding our shared life calmly and fairly. The house, the finances, Isla's needs, everything will be handled responsibly. I will not contest anything. I'm stepping away quietly as I have lived quietly." He reread the words aloud softly. They sounded colder than he intended, but they were precise, honest. Next, he turned to Isla's letter. Her handwriting had long surpassed his expectations. She would notice if he faltered. He wanted her to feel love, not confusion, courage, not fear. "Dear Isla," he began, "you are the bravest, smartest, most wonderful girl I know. I want you to remember that none of this is your fault. I love you. Always have, always will. You are my daughter in every way that matters. I will not disappear from your life because you are the most important part of mine." He added a paragraph about believing in her, about standing by her even from afar, about the little things, homework he would help with over video calls, jokes shared at bedtime, the way she made him laugh with the simplest comments. "I will always be proud of you. Always." David read both letters several times, careful not to let any trace of bitterness slip through. He folded them neatly, sliding each into a separate envelope. He addressed them in his own handwriting, steady, deliberate, free of flourish. The handwriting was as controlled as the emotions he refused to show outwardly. He placed Ilera's envelope on the counter, where she would find it first, and Isla's on her bed. He pictured her picking it up, curious, smiling, perhaps tearing it open quickly. The letters were his final acts in a life he could no longer inhabit fully. Not dramatic, not vindictive, just honest, intimate, restrained. He leaned back in his chair and let the quiet settle around him, listening to the soft hum of the city outside, knowing that when morning came, his words would speak for him. Chapter 10, Departure Day. The morning light was pale, filtered through clouds that promised snow later. David moved quietly through the house, gathering his luggage with a meticulous calm he did not feel. Each zipper, each strap was checked twice. Clothes folded, documents placed neatly in the compartments he'd labeled weeks ago. Downstairs, Alara was in the kitchen, her coffee untouched, a travel mug half full beside her. Isla sat at the table, backpack open, pencils scattered around her math notebook. She looked up when David appeared, bright-eyed but sleepy. "Dad," she said softly. "Hey, kiddo," he replied, crouching to her level. He kissed the top of her head and ruffled her hair. "Big day, huh?" Isla nodded, fidgeting with the zipper of her jacket. "Are we going soon?" "Yes. Your mom's car will be here any minute," David said. He forced a smile, the kind that said everything was normal, even when it wasn't. Alara glanced at him from the counter. "I'll handle the bags," she said lightly, as if she didn't notice the tightness in his shoulders. David placed his hand briefly on her arm. She didn't flinch, didn't lean into it. It was a gesture meant more for himself than for her. "Be safe," he told Isla. "I will," she whispered, hugging him quickly before running to grab her coat. The doorbell rang. David's heart sank a little at the sound of the tires crunching against the drive. He followed Isla to the front door. She turned briefly, looking up at him, eyes wide. "Will I see you soon?" she asked. David crouched again, meeting her gaze. "Always, in every way I can. Remember, I'm proud of you. You're brave, smart, everything I hope to be." Isla smiled faintly, brushing past him to step outside. Alara carried the last bag, her movements purposeful, efficient. No lingering glances, no hesitation. David closed the door after they left, the echo of it sounding impossibly loud in the empty hallway. He walked to the kitchen and picked up the envelopes he had prepared the night before. One for Alara, one for Isla. He placed them carefully on the counter, side by side. The house seemed too quiet now, hollow in a way it hadn't been before. The furniture, the photographs, the faint smell of breakfast lingering in the air, all of it belonged to someone else, to a life he was leaving behind. David paused in the center of the kitchen, hands resting on the counter, feeling the weight of what he had done. There was no shouting, no tears, no dramatic confrontation, just a quiet acknowledgement that this was over. He grabbed his coat and luggage, checked his flight details one last time, and walked to the car waiting outside. Each step echoed on the porch, a sound that felt both final and liberating. As the city streets blurred past in the taxi, David let himself exhale fully for the first time in months. The house receded in the rearview mirror, a symbol of the life he had carefully untangled, of love that was real but no longer secure, of presence that didn't guarantee belonging. And with that, he boarded his flight to Japan, leaving behind more than a home, leaving behind a chapter of his life that had quietly closed. Chapter 11, Arrival in Tokyo. The plane touched down quietly, the tires kissing the tarmac with a soft, mechanical sigh. David remained seated for a moment, hands folded, staring out at the runway lights cutting through the low-hanging fog. The hum of the engine slowed, then stopped, leaving only the faint vibration of the cabin. Around him, passengers stretched and gathered belongings, but David stayed still, letting the weight of the city waiting outside settle over him. When the doors opened, the cold air of Tokyo struck him first, not harsh, but unfamiliar, carrying the scent of winter streets, exhaust, and something undefinably new. He rolled his suitcase through the airport, the rhythm of his wheels echoing on the polished floors. Signs in kanji loomed above him, bright and precise. He didn't read them, didn't need to. The language felt like a reflection of his own disorientation. Clear, ordered, but incomprehensible in its entirety. By the time he collected his luggage, the sun had begun to dip, washing the airport in amber light. He hailed a taxi, sliding into the back seat with practiced calm, though his chest felt oddly tight. Outside, the city pulsed with energy. Neon signs flickered to life. Pedestrians moved quickly, their faces intent. The streets were alive, yet he felt apart from it all, a solitary figure moving through a sea of strangers. The driver spoke rapidly, words he couldn't understand. David nodded politely, hands folded on his lap, eyes scanning the streets. Each unfamiliar detail, shops with glowing kanji, vending machines on every corner, the neat lines of bicycles parked in rows, reminded him that he was far from home, far from the life he had known. At the apartment, he unlocked the door with a key card, stepping inside to a space that was empty, neutral, and unfamiliar. The walls were bare, the furniture functional, minimal, the bed perfectly made, the kitchen clean, no trace of anyone else. He set down his luggage and walked slowly through the rooms, letting the silence settle around him. No laughter, no chatter, no little footsteps racing through the hall. He stood at the window, looking out at the neon-lit streets below. Lights flickered, traffic flowed, people moved with purpose. In that city of millions, he realized he could exist without interruption, without expectation. The unfamiliar streets mirrored his own emotional state, alive, complicated, beautiful, and isolating all at once. David sank into the chair by the window, fingers brushing over the smooth surface of the table beside him. He thought of Alara. He thought of Isla. He thought of the house he had left behind, the letters he had written, the quietness of departure. And he felt something he hadn't in months, a sense of presence in his own life, free from the constant tug of obligations that had never truly recognized him. For the first time, he was alone, completely alone. And yet, in that aloneness, he felt visible, not to others, not to Alara or Isla, not even to colleagues, but visible to himself. The city stretched endlessly beyond the window, and David allowed himself to simply exist there in the strange, ordered, and unforgiving clarity of Tokyo. Chapter 12, Aspen Cracks. The aspen snow was light that morning, dusting the evergreens in a soft, sparkling layer. Alara stepped out of the rental SUV, her boots crunching against the fresh powder. Isla raced ahead, laughing as she kicked snow into the air. Alara pulled her scarf tighter, smiling at the scene, but beneath the surface, unease flickered. She reached for her phone to check in with David. No answer. She tried again. Voicemail. She frowned, pressing her thumb against the screen, willing it to change. Maybe he was asleep. Maybe he had his phone on silent. But hours passed, calls unanswered, messages unread. At first, she told herself it didn't matter. He's busy, she muttered, tucking the phone into her pocket. She kept herself occupied with unpacking, organizing Isla's things in the cabin, checking the heating system. Each task felt oddly hollow, the familiar rhythm unable to quiet the growing tension in her chest. By the afternoon, panic had begun to nibble at the edges of her composure. She called again. Nothing. Texts went unanswered. She walked through the cabin, searching for her phone, the snow-glassed windows reflecting a distorted image of herself. The absence of his presence, once comforting, now felt like a void. Mom. Isla's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. Alara forced a smile. Everything's fine, sweetie. Don't worry about it. Isla nodded, but her brows furrowed, perceptive even at 10 years old. He's not answering? Alara hesitated. He'll call. Probably busy with work stuff. Isla shuffled back to her room, unconvinced. Alara sank into the couch, her fingers tracing the rim of a coffee mug. The warmth did little to soothe the cold, not growing in her stomach. Something was off. She tried again, desperation edging her voice. No answer. Her thoughts raced. Did he miss the flight? Did something happen? Her mind conjured every worst-case scenario with terrifying speed. By nightfall, the cracks were impossible to ignore. Alara felt a hollow anxiety settle over her like the darkness outside the cabin windows. David didn't just ignore her. He didn't just stay quiet. Something deeper had shifted. She scrolled through her phone one last time, scanning every message, every missed call, every email they had exchanged in the last week. Nothing explained this silence. No warning, no explanation, no trace of hesitation. She sank into a chair, elbows on knees, hands covering her face. The panic she had suppressed all day now bubbled freely. How could he vanish like this? She had assumed his silence was passive compliance, that he would remain anchored, reachable, predictable. But he wasn't, and the thought landed heavily, starkly, like ice across her chest. David had disappeared. Her gaze wandered to the snow-laden trees outside, distorted through frosted glass, twisting familiar shapes into strange, alien forms. The world looked the same, but it was no longer the one she thought she knew. She exhaled sharply, trying to steady herself. The cabin, the laughter of Isla, the comfort of the holiday, they all seemed fragile now, hanging by threads she hadn't realized were already fraying. For the first time that day, she understood with chilling clarity. He didn't just stay quiet. He had vanished. Chapter 13, The Discovery. The aspen sun was pale and brittle as Alara walked into the small lobby of the rental office, still fuming from unanswered calls and the gnawing worry that had grown through the morning. She spotted a message blinking on her phone, an email from David's assistant, marked urgent. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tapped it open. Subject: Tokyo transfer confirmation. Her eyes scanned the lines, each sentence striking like cold steel. He had accepted the offer. Immediately. Relocated. Effective immediately. The words blurred together as panic replaced the calm confidence she had carried just hours ago. She read them again, slowly, deliberately, then aloud, almost to convince herself it wasn't real. He accepted. He's gone. He's actually gone. Isla's laughter drifted up from outside as she skated with other kids near the lodge. Alara pressed her palm to her forehead, feeling dizzy, disoriented. How could he? He had been silent. Yes, but she had assumed he would stay. He had to stay. Mom? Are you okay? Isla's voice rang out, cautious, tinged with worry. Alara straightened abruptly, forcing a smile. I'm fine, sweetie. Just thinking. Isla nodded and went back to her game, but Alara could no longer focus on snow or holiday lights. Her mind raced. She paced the cabin, the email open on her phone, the tiny screen glowing like a warning. Months of planning, of subtle maneuvering, of her carefully delivered ultimatum, all unraveling before her eyes. She thought of the words she had spoken so casually that night. If you don't like it, divorce me. She hadn't imagined he would ever act on it. Not truly, not this decisively. She had expected hesitation, an argument, a compromise, maybe even tears. She had never anticipated absence. Her hands shook as she dialed his number again, over and over, only to hear the same sterile voicemail. She stomped a foot, frustration mingling with fear. Time was passing. Every second heightened the panic curling in her chest. Alara grabbed her coat and boots, ignoring Isla's protests. Sweetie, I need you to stay here with Mrs. Patterson. I'll be back soon, she said, voice tighter than intended. But Mom, no buts, she snapped gently, the weight of her panic leaving little room for compromise. She stuffed her phone in her pocket and ran to the car, the tires crunching over fresh snow as she started the engine. Every street, every passing skier, every snow-dusted tree blurred past in a haze of anxiety. Her mind replayed every interaction from the past weeks. His silence, his methodical movements, the emails she'd thought were inconsequential. By the time she reached the highway, reality had begun to settle like ice in her stomach. This wasn't just avoidance. This wasn't merely silence. David had left, and she was unprepared. Isla's small, trusting face lingered in her mind as she sped toward the airport, heart pounding. The weight of her ultimatum, the one she had delivered almost flippantly, pressed down on her with sudden clarity. She hadn't just threatened. She had set events in motion. And now, she had to face the consequences. Chapter 14, The Empty House. The familiar click of the front door unlocked the house, but there was no welcome. No creak of floorboards announcing someone's presence. No smell of coffee or a faint aroma of dinner lingering. Alara stepped inside, the weight of her haze from aspen pressing down with every step. David, she called softly, then louder. Isla, Dad. Silence. The house felt foreign in its stillness. The living room, once warm with familiarity, seemed hollow. Cushions were in place, surfaces polished and clear, the subtle signs of a lived-in home erased. Her heart thumped. Something was wrong. She moved through the rooms quickly. Isla's drawings still lined the fridge. A jacket hung by the coat rack, his briefcase absent. Her steps echoed unnaturally. Then she saw them. 2 envelopes, neatly placed on the kitchen counter. One was addressed to her. One to Isla. Her fingers trembled as she reached for hers, the handwriting unmistakable. David's. She held it in her hands, staring at it, as if the paper itself could explain everything. Her mind raced, refusing to accept the truth immediately. Maybe he had left a note somewhere else. Maybe he had gone out. Maybe she tore the envelope open, eyes scanning the familiar, measured handwriting. The words hit her slowly at first, then with relentless force. He was gone. The Tokyo transfer, the divorce, the care he had taken to leave everything organized and fair. Every sentence precise, deliberate, impossible to misinterpret. Alara sank into a chair, the letter trembling in her hands. She read the lines again and again, each repetition reinforcing the finality she hadn't wanted to see. No, this isn't real, she whispered. Her voice echoed off the empty walls. She looked around, searching for a shadow, a sound, any sign that he was still here, waiting to say it had been a mistake. The second envelope, meant for Isla, sat quietly beside the first. Alara's fingers hovered over it, unwilling to open it, yet dreading not knowing what it contained. The thought of David writing to their daughter, explaining love and reassurance while he left, twisted in her chest. She staggered to the window, staring out at the snow-covered driveway. The city beyond moved on, unaware that a life had quietly shifted. Panic, disbelief, and anger fought inside her. How could he just leave? Without confrontation, without explanation beyond the letters. Her hands gripped the counter. She pressed her forehead against the cool surface, struggling to steady her breath. The calmness he had shown in every decision, his careful, meticulous preparation, mocked her desperation. This can't be real, she muttered again. But deep down she knew it was. The house, once a symbol of security, now felt like a monument to absence. Every room, every corner, every photograph was a reminder that he had not just chosen to leave physically, he had chosen to leave emotionally, decisively, and irrevocably. And finally, as the hours stretched in the hollow quiet, Alara understood something she had refused to admit. David meant every word. Chapter 15, The Call. The apartment in Tokyo was quiet, the soft hum of the air conditioner filling the spaces between thoughts. David sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, staring at the small screen. When it rang, the display lit up with a number from Aspen. His chest tightened slightly, not from fear, but from the inevitability of what was coming. He swiped to answer. Hello. David, it's me. Alara's voice trembled across the distance, fragile, familiar, and fractured all at once. Alara, he said softly. His tone was calm, steady, measured. There was a pause, broken only by a shudder in her breathing. I don't understand, she whispered. I don't understand why you left, why you went. David leaned back, letting the silence stretch just long enough for the weight of her words to settle. You told me to leave if I didn't like it, he said quietly, almost a statement of fact. No, I didn't mean, I didn't think you'd actually do it. Her voice cracked, rising with panic. I thought you'd stay. I thought you'd fight. I didn't think you'd actually vanish. David's fingers rested lightly on the screen. I'm not gone because of anger or spite. I left because the space for me to exist in that life wasn't there anymore. It was never about fighting for Isla or even you. It was about retaining the dignity of living a life I can recognize as my own. You don't understand, she said, voice rising now, tinged with desperation. I never stopped loving you. I made a mistake. I wanted to fix it. I can fix it. David exhaled slowly. Alara, this isn't a negotiation. There is no fix that can undo what's already been set in motion. You made a choice, and I responded with one of my own. I'm not asking for revenge. I am simply choosing to exist where I am seen, where I matter without contest. Her sobs came through the line now, ragged, urgent. But Isla, what about her? She needs you. She calls you dad. How could you? How could you leave her? I love her, David said, calm, almost gentle. I always will. That doesn't mean I have to stay where my presence is framed as inadequate, where I must compete for a place I've already earned in heart, but am denied in reality. I am not abandoning her. I am ensuring that the love I give is intact, uncorrupted by resentment or frustration. Ilara's breathing hitched. You mean every word? You're serious? David's voice did not waver. Every word. I am present for Isla in ways that matter. I'm stepping away from what destroys me. That is not absence. That is survival. That is dignity. There was silence on the line, filled only with the faint static of distance and the soft whir of the Tokyo air conditioner. Ilara's voice came finally, small, broken. I understand. David nodded, though she couldn't see it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm only asking for respect, for the life I am choosing. And with that, the long conversation, heavy with confession, regret, and emotional revelation, came to a quiet close. David hung up, the apartment around him still, the city lights flickering outside, and for the first time in months, he felt entirely present in his own life. Chapter 16, Truth Without Cruelty. David leaned back in his chair, Tokyo lights flickering against the wall behind him. The phone line still held Ilara's presence, her breathing uneven, hesitant. He spoke slowly, deliberately, each word chosen not to wound, but to clarify a truth she had avoided for months. Ilara, he began, voice calm even, I need you to hear something I've known for a while. You've already chosen, emotionally. You've been moving toward Cashin for months. Not physically, necessarily, but in every way that matters. Your heart has been elsewhere, and you've been living this life with me as if it could mask that choice. Her silence was heavy, punctuated only by a faint sob. I'm not saying this to punish you. I'm saying it so you understand why I can't stay. I can't exist in a space where I am competing for a place that is already lost, where the love I give, steady and unwavering, is measured and found insufficient against someone else who has already claimed it. I thought I could. Her voice cracked, trailing off. David interrupted gently. You can't. Not now. Not after the distance has grown so long. Not after the choices you've made. There was a pause, filled with the sound of the city outside and the quiet hum of the air conditioner. He could hear her shaking, and he spoke softly, almost tenderly. I'm not angry. I'm not seeking revenge. I am merely protecting the life I have left, the self-respect I have earned. Staying would not be love. It would be self-destruction. Ilara, tried to protest, but the words faltered. David continued, steady, unwavering. I provided for this family, yes. I showed up, yes. But love isn't measured in presence or provision alone. It's measured in reciprocity, in acknowledgement, in the knowledge that your heart is in the same place as your words. Yours has already left. Staying would only hollow me out, piece by piece, until the man I am ceases to exist. Her sobs grew sharper, her voice small. I never thought I didn't think you'd actually leave. David exhaled softly. I didn't leave out of anger or spite. I left because the space for me to matter fully and authentically no longer exists. And when someone tells you, plainly and calmly, that they no longer see you as indispensable, there is nothing left to fight for except what erodes you from the inside. I am choosing not to be eroded. There was silence then, pregnant with the weight of what he had said. No yelling, no accusations, just the quiet reality of a life measured and decided. I wanted you to hear this clearly, he said finally, voice gentle but firm. Not with cruelty, not with drama, just the truth. You already made your choice. I am merely making mine. Ilara didn't respond immediately. The line was heavy, filled with her trembling breaths and the faint static of distance. David closed his eyes for a moment, letting the gravity of the moment settle. I won't compete for a place I already hold in heart, but am denied in presence, he finished, the words deliberate, final. And with that, the truth hung in the air, clear, unyielding, and devoid of cruelty. Chapter 17, Isla's Voice. David's phone buzzed late one evening in Tokyo. He glanced at the screen and saw Isla's name. His chest tightened, equal parts relief and apprehension. He swiped to answer, hearing her small, familiar voice immediately. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, kiddo," he said softly, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "How are you?" I want to talk," she said, her words hesitant. There was a pause, the kind only a child can fill with uncertainty and courage all at once. I think I always knew something was wrong." David's heart ached. He motioned to the empty apartment around him, though she couldn't see it. "What do you mean?" "I don't know, like, the house felt different. And Mom and you were not the same." Her voice cracked slightly. I think, that the marriage was breaking." He swallowed, keeping his voice steady. "You're very perceptive, Isla. You notice things adults sometimes hide. That shows a lot of courage." Isla paused. "But you're still my dad, right? Even if everything's different." David felt a lump in his throat. He sat down on the edge of the bed, gripping the phone as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Always, Isla. You are my daughter in every way that matters. Nothing can change that. I will always be your dad. Always." She let out a small, trembling laugh. "I'm scared I don't want to lose you." "You won't," he said gently. "I will always be here for you, even if it's not in the same house. We'll talk, we'll video call, we'll share homework and jokes and stories. Nothing can take away the love we have." "But it's not the same," she admitted, quiet and raw. "I don't get to see you every day. I don't get to do normal dad things." David nodded, though she couldn't see him. "I know, kiddo. I'm sorry. I wish things could be different. But sometimes life doesn't give us the normal we hope for. We make our love bigger to fit the distance, not smaller." A silence fell, filled with unspoken grief and trust, a shared understanding that nothing could fully replace what had been lost. "I still call you Dad," she said finally, a whisper but firm like a lifeline. "Even if Mom thinks she has to take other stuff from me. Even if it's weird now." David exhaled, a mixture of sorrow and gratitude flooding him. "That means more to me than you can know. You have no idea how much that means." "I don't want you to be sad," Isla said. I want you to be happy." "Thank you, Em," he said, voice breaking softly. "That's all I could ever want from you. That you know you are loved, and that loving me doesn't make you choose." They talked long into the night about school, jokes, small victories, and plans for the next video call. Each word, each laugh, each pause was bittersweet, a tether across continents. When the call ended, David sat in silence, staring at the city lights outside the window. He felt the weight of loss, the home he left, the life he gave up, the routines he would never share. But in Isla's voice, he heard what mattered most. The love they shared. Even across oceans, even against circumstance, he was still her father. And for the first time in months, that love felt both sustaining and achingly fragile. Chapter 18, What Remains. Tokyo moved around David like a river, indifferent and unstoppable. He had settled into the rhythm of his new apartment and the sprawling office building downtown. Mornings began with a quiet cup of coffee on the balcony, the city stretching below him in neon lines and muted sounds of traffic. The routine was unfamiliar, yet comforting, a life structured entirely for him for the first time in years. He walked the streets during lunch, observing the ordered chaos of the city. Salarymen hurried past, umbrellas bobbed under gray skies, and vendors called out in rapid Japanese. No one here knew him. No one expected anything from him. And that, more than anything, was a kind of freedom. The first week passed with methodical precision. Work, meals, short calls with Isla, emails answered promptly. David allowed himself brief moments of quiet reflection, sitting by the window at night, watching the lights ripple across the streets below, feeling the absence of the life he had left behind. The ache was there, subtle but persistent, a reminder that love never truly disappears. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Alara confronted the consequences of her ultimatum. The reality of an empty house settled over her like snow on a fragile roof. Isla asked questions she couldn't answer. Friends offered advice she couldn't take. Each missed call from David, each unreturned message weighed heavily. Panic, regret, and frustration mingled in a swirl she couldn't untangle. "You didn't think he'd actually go, did you?" one friend asked gently over coffee. Alara shook her head, unable to speak. She had expected hesitation, negotiation, compromise. She had not expected decisiveness, not finality. And then there was Isla, caught quietly in the middle. The girl navigated her days between two fathers, one present physically, the other emotionally unwavering despite distance. She learned to adapt, to measure words, to treasure fleeting conversations, video calls, small gestures. Her love was divided, yet whole in its own way, resilient in ways only a child could be. David watched her laughter through a screen, heard her shy questions about schoolwork and friends, and smiled despite the distance. He could not tuck her in a bed, attend parent-teacher conferences, or guide her through scraped knees. But he could be constant, deliberate, present in the moments he could control. Evenings in Tokyo were long and quiet, filled with deliberate solitude. David walked the narrow streets near his apartment, the neon signs reflecting in puddles from a recent rain. He thought of the life he had left, the house, Alara, the mornings with Isla. He felt grief, yes, but also clarity. The illusions of control, of permanence, of unquestioned belonging had dissolved. No one had truly won. The marriage had ended. The home had emptied. Hearts had fractured in their own ways. Yet in the distance, in the deliberate choices and quiet love that remained, a new reality had settled. David's reflection in the glass of the balcony door stared back at him, steady, present, and unyielding. He had lost much, but he had gained clarity. The illusion of control had fallen away. What remained was truth, presence, and the enduring, unshakable bond with the daughter he would always call his own. And in that, there was a kind of victory that no one else could claim. Chapter 19, Quiet Finality. The email arrived on a Thursday morning, small and unremarkable in appearance, yet carrying the weight of years in its brief lines. The subject simply read, "Divorce finalized." David stared at the screen for a long moment, coffee growing cold beside him, city lights flickering across the apartment walls. There was no fanfare, no dramatic announcement, no declaration of triumph or defeat, just a confirmation, a legal acknowledgement of a life carefully untangled, a chapter formally closed. He leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced, and let out a slow breath. The silence of the apartment seemed almost ceremonious. For months, he had prepared for this, planned for it, accepted it quietly. Now the finality was official. Across the ocean, Alara read the same email in her kitchen, hands gripping the edge of the counter. The words hit differently now that reality could not be negotiated, could not be delayed. The house was empty. David was in Tokyo. Isla's mornings and nights would no longer include both parents in the same room. Panic, regret, and helplessness swirled in her chest. She slumped into the nearest chair, staring at the screen, realizing that the quiet she had expected in his compliance had transformed into irreversible absence. David picked up his phone and dialed Isla's number. She answered on the second ring, voice small but steady. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, kiddo," he replied, calm, grounding. "I wanted you to hear it from me first. Everything's finalized now." Isla made a soft, almost imperceptible noise, a mix of acknowledgement and grief. "So it's really over?" "Yes," David said gently. "For me and Mom. But I'm still here for you. That never changes." She exhaled slowly. "Okay, I understand." He smiled, though the smile was tinged with sadness. "You're doing very well, Isla. I'm proud of you." The rest of the day passed in a quiet routine. David filed away the email in a folder marked personal, closed his laptop, and walked to the balcony. Tokyo stretched before him, lights shimmering, streets moving, life unfolding without pause. The city mirrored his own quiet presence, alive, orderly, and indifferent to the past. He thought of the house he had left behind, of Alara, of the life that had existed within its walls. He had grieved it, respected it, and now accepted it. There was no anger, no desire for confrontation, no longing for vindication, only recognition. Life had moved on. Even in Aspen, Alara faced the weight of her choices. She could not undo what had been set into motion. The absence of drama, the lack of spectacle, was itself a punishment she had not anticipated. Life had quietly shifted, leaving her to reckon with consequences and decisions without the solace of blame or argument. David returned to his apartment, brewed tea, and sat by the window, watching the neon reflections ripple across wet pavement. The end of the marriage was not marked by shouting or confrontation, but by an unassuming, undeniable truth. No one truly won. No one needed to. The story had reached its conclusion, and the only remaining task was living forward. Paperwork, distance, acceptance, the quiet markers of finality. And in that stillness, David felt the subtle, profound peace of closure. Chapter 20: The Cost of Ultimatums. David sat in the small Tokyo apartment, the late afternoon light stretching across the floor in long, golden rectangles. He held a cup of tea in his hands, steam curling lazily into the quiet room. Outside, the city moved relentlessly. Buses honked, bicycles rattled over metal grates, and pedestrians hurried past storefronts. The life of millions continued, indifferent to his solitude. He thought of Alara, of Aspen, of the house now emptied of his presence. He pictured Isla running through the living room, laughter echoing, unaware of the magnitude of the changes she would learn to navigate. And he thought of the ultimatum that had started it all, the careless words spoken one snowy December evening, a threat disguised as choice. If you don't like it, divorce me. At the time, he had stayed silent. He had stepped away, methodically, deliberately, preserving what dignity he could while untangling a life that had grown increasingly incompatible with his own. And now, months later, the truth had settled around him like a calm snowfall. Ultimatums carry a cost far beyond the speaker's intention. He sipped the tea, warm on his tongue, grounding him. Words have power, he thought. They can ignite arguments, close hearts, or sever bonds in ways that cannot be undone. Alara's casual declaration of choice had forced his hand, but his response had been measured, restrained. In quiet, he had exercised control, not in confrontation, but in deliberate absence. The lesson was profound. Silence, when chosen with purpose, could be a form of power. Not the silence of weakness, but the silence of clarity. He had not shouted. He had not begged. He had not retaliated. He had simply acted in accordance with the life he wanted to inhabit, fully, authentically, uncompromised. He set the cup down and looked out over the city, the neon lights flickering as dusk fell. Life would go on in both Aspen and Tokyo. Alara would learn the weight of her choices. Isla would adapt, finding love in two directions, learning resilience early. And David, he would continue, fully present in his own life for the first time in years. A quiet satisfaction settled over him. Not triumph, not victory, but the steady assurance that he had acted in alignment with his principles. He had chosen dignity over desperation, calm over chaos, and truth over illusion. And in that choice, he found a freedom he had long sought, but never truly grasped while entangled in expectations, obligations, and silent compromises. The apartment was still, the only sounds the hum of appliances and the distant murmur of traffic. The house he had left behind was now a memory, a symbol of what can be lost when ultimatums are thrown without regard for consequence. Some doors, once closed, remain closed forever, not with fanfare, not with screaming, but with resolve. David exhaled a long, measured release and allowed himself to feel the weight of everything he had endured and the quiet clarity of what remained. He picked up his cup again, staring out at the city that did not know him. And for the first time in months, he felt entirely, unequivocally, at home in his own life. Some battles are lost, some hearts broken, some families rearranged. But the courage to step away without drama, to leave with dignity intact, that is a victory of a quieter, more enduring kind. And in that quiet finality, he understood. Ultimatums are not just words. They are catalysts. And the cost sometimes is everything.